So, last time I rambled on about self-identification in the fandom and how that affects our expectations of furries around us. Because I didn't want to make one super long, massive, boring video, I opted for 3 shorter, boring videos instead. So this is a follow-on where I'll be talking about dealing with conflict more directly, because it happens just too much. And not just on a furry level, all kinds of intersectional social media communities. While many of us enter a fandom or social media space with trepidation that we may not be accepted for whatever reason, coming across conflict can nevertheless be a shock, even if we may have been expecting rejection beforehand. The further you go, the more combative we get because it feels like it sabotages the positive experience we've had so far. We perceive it to be a threat, consciously or otherwise. This seems particularly bothersome for casual fans who are just here for the artwork, or devotees who absorb every aspect of the subculture as part of their existence. As long as it feeds their need for more content, extraneous behaviour doesn't have an effect on what they get to enjoy. They merely reject unwanted content or backstory or, social standings and stuff like that as irrelevant. This is the I hate drama crowd who want to get on with appreciating and sharing what they feel vilified for by the public for doing. Even though there are a lot of recognisable figureheads who get shared in our feeds every day, there are more passive consumers in furry than there are creators, even though the crossover is greater than probably any other fandom in existence. It can be a huge problem when furry creators are that much closer to their fans and are part of the community that not only pays for their content, but also plays the accompanying parts of audience and critic as well. The network becomes tighter, and controversies have immediate repercussions. I don't have to name anybody in particular because the reaction is pretty much the same all round. But there are specific scenarios that create very divisive surges, usually someone being outed as an abuser or a zoophile, a rapist, a bully, a groomer, etc. The only thing that has a more unilateral response is the discovery of a scammer, if it's art, money, or a Fursona thief. Nobody likes that. And the cynic in me says that it's because it affects a character more than a person. And if there's one thing the fandom has a dark habit of doing, it's a tendency to put more credence in a persona than who's behind it. The nicer, more rational side of me says it's because a large portion of the community is artists and creators themselves, so know the repercussions of having art stolen or money lost. However, when it comes to a war with the cult of popularity, things get much more heated. This seems to be the epicenter of toxicity where the greatest battles for furry identity take place. The crucial factor here is a tendency for consumers to oversimplify the fandom to furry is furry art, regardless of the content, instead of furry as community, which is what I talked about last time. If you consider furry as anything with a soft texture and an animal face, then any criticism is technically inappropriate, and the people behind it are null, because the genre literally encompasses everything superficial, and those who create it are welcome regardless, even the egregiously awful. If you instead look at furry as a group of real, actual people creating content, then yes, expulsion of toxicity is absolutely viable and necessary to keep it going. So these become the 2 groups in a big fandom dust-up. One is the consumer-led group and those who exploit it, who compartmentalize the community network as secondary to the content and its creators, and the second, which is a much greater cross-section of creators and fans that accepts furry as an expression by that fandom or an ideal alternate, and holds everyone equally accountable for how they treat others within it. And in the middle is where you see all the conflicts like tweet wars, muting, blocking, subtweets, screenshots, name-calling, enablers, apologists. It all gets horrifically messy. The ones who lose out in these war zones are the good faith furries who want the fandom to do better, but are met with resistance and hostility for trying to find a genuine balance, because sensational blanket statements and screenshot receipts get the highest viral share. Nuance is fatiguing to maintain when everyone's shouting at once, especially if those other voices have more clout and a tsunami of followers who hang on their every uwu. But wait, you ask, aren't these groups just as toxic as each other? No. Being resistant to change out of convenience to you is much more harmful in the long term than asking someone to examine their behaviours and alter their course. Terms like SJW, witch hunt, cancel culture, and fandom police are ad hominem put-downs used to diminish critics instead of addressing the issues themselves. It reduces people to that level of the bossy Marge Simpson squirrel caricature to discourage onlookers from attaching merit to their views. Unironic users of such language are either very cynical or self-serving, or have no concept of the seriousness of these issues, and all of these are kind of sad situations to be in. Either way, it's an apathetic view that takes security in ignorance rather than extend any effort to make things better, even if there's an acknowledgement that they are legitimately bad in a real-world context. However, even a good argument can be portrayed aggressively, and this doesn't help negate the image of valid criticisms as being paraded by a group of kink-shaming crusaders. It also gets confused when people who do go on very long call-out sprees are then themselves found to be hiding something kind of disgusting, because that then diminishes the value of their call-out and everyone goes back to the behavior that they thought was acceptable before because, oh well, you know, it was just drama, look at that. And it's very annoying. So, how do we avoid this earthquake of consequences whenever a bad fandom take or unscrupulous action falls from orbit to murder us all? Considering most of our interaction is online, some of the conflict comes from how we communicate, although honestly the greater proportion is due to those with willful negligence to take responsibility, bashing against people wanting and desperately needing change. And this is where we have to talk about the dangerous, never fails to start an argument word, privilege. Because many are privileged in some way or another. It doesn't mean you're evil or opportunistic, it's just a factor of your circumstances that means you won't have to deal with certain issues as badly as other groups. If you're white, straight, cis, neurotypical, and able-bodied, you're not going to face the extra difficulties that people of colour, LGBTQ folk, neurodiverse, and disabled have to struggle through. You're not inherently bad for being privileged, but you can misuse your position, whether it's in ignorance or malice. When you refuse to listen or speak over someone trying to bring an issue to you, you are hindering their ability to exist in a given space, whether online or in person. And another point of privilege that is more specific to the fandom is about clout. The bigger your clout, the more you can afford to ignore, and that's inevitably going to turn people away from or actively against you if you focus exclusively on yourself and or recuse yourself from drama because you're worried about how it affects your image. Or it's the ability to ignore people's desperate GoFundMe posts because you don't want your feed to be depressing, or because it has a photo of a real-life human instead of a fursuit. Privilege is a poison if you don't handle it well, and the people who are hurt by it are injured doubly so when others fail to act. When privilege is weaponized, it gets even worse. Deliberately asking people not to pay attention is dangerous. And sure, there are frivolous callouts, but the majority of them explicitly are not, especially when backed up with evidence. But big-name abusers absolutely use the fear of cancel culture to foster the propaganda that they could come for you too, and think that any criticism is made with a malicious agenda when they're trying to expunge missing stairs. This is where the corkscrew in the ear terms like call-out culture and drama twist their way to conflate legitimate problems with bad faith arguments or professional social sabotage, because consumer identifiers see debate as criticism of overall fandom existence instead of a single undesirable behavior or depiction to be excluded. The irony is ditching crusty old bigoted creators in favor of new ones wouldn't affect the consumers in any way at all, but the collector mentality, much like Ready Player One, is very hard to break. An important thing to remember is when people say, I want insert crappy attribute here out of the fandom, it's usually a means of encouraging people to eliminate abusive behaviors instead of a push for specific people to leave. Now, when someone is blatantly unrepentant about the past or makes no effort to change at all, the two become synonymous. However, if a statement like transphobes should not be allowed in the fandom makes you angry, that's very much a you problem, and you should definitely think about what you're trying to defend and why. If we are, and I believe we are, conditioned to reacting negatively and explosively, it's because we're preempting aggressive defense of problematic behaviors. By this point, after so many people acting in ignorance or neutrality to deflect any kind of resolution to the problem, it has happened far too much already, and ignoring it is no longer acceptable. Raised fists are now the standard first step because nothing else in the past has worked. If you want to stop that, dismissing someone's concerns as drama is not going to make the hurt magically go away. You can't laugh away someone else's problems because it's an inconvenience to you. accountability is not that hard. If you're randomly swinging your arms around at a crowded party and punch someone in the face, they're going to tell you it hurts. If your response to say, well, it doesn't hurt me, or you shouldn't have been the one standing there, then yeah, you're the asshole. If you threw the punch, even if you weren't intending to hit anyone with it, regardless of your intent, it's just embarrassing to play off that you didn't have any responsibility for your actions. That goes for using slurs, throwing adult content into safer workspaces, any place where you are the one making that engagement. What makes it seem worse to people who get punched in the face a lot accidentally is that there are plenty of people who not only do it deliberately, repeatedly, but also gain great praise and even money from it. Getting ignored about why it hurts so much makes each instance of it happening again feel so much worse. That's why debate, discourse, arguments can escalate so quickly, because they're tired of each time having to explain why being punched in the face hurts, when it should be obvious. You can absolutely bet that there'll be people demanding to see your neurology reports as proof that it legitimately caused pain. Do you not see how that makes you, the punch jockey, the arsehole? And yes, this 100% goes for bigotry like racism and homophobia. The thing is, the tiniest change can make a world of difference. So your edgy joke fell flat. You want to be liked and make people happy, right? So we all just get along? That's what everyone claims anyway. Some people are far more invested in doing what they want regardless instead, and claiming it's for the benefit of the community when all it does is reward their edgy, abusive humour. Adding to this, Furry is a paradoxical fandom with an infinite memory and generally a terrible attention span, and communities that overlap at random. Kind of like if Wikipedia had no search function at all and relied on you clicking keywords to find out what you needed. Large-scale trending conflicts seem to last for ages, but resurges with new individual as the furore spreads wider and new or old stuff gets added to the fire. It becomes a learned response to immediately cut people off from the onset of a new discourse episode, because concerns are often met with shrugs, apologism, or outright rebuse whenever they're brought up. This is hurtful and exhausting, so it's natural to vent and walk off or block when it next shows its head. Let me ask you something. Do you refuse to flush the toilet because you want to enjoy the memories of the food you ate? I'm going to bet not. The fear of what is actually a very normal and healthy response, that is, rejecting or hurtful and dangerous crap and flushing the toilet, morphs into this absolute visceral fear of losing anything relevant to the fandom. So you bringing this fear of losing your special furry turd into a conversation about how someone broke their arm when they slipped in it absolutely does not help. When it feels like nothing changes, your world becomes smaller, and as you turn to the people you can trust and away from a wider community that keeps denying your validity. That's a very big problem for a self-reliant fandom, and especially for marginalized groups, furries of color, LGBTQ furs, and so on. None of the furry subgroups is large enough to sustain itself completely, but as long as there are new voices coming through, it will keep its equilibrium. That's why they must be supported. To find out what you can do, practical things that you can do whenever an argument turns up, check out the next part, because this is already kind of long.